So looking at the last part of our 2.10 experiments assessment, particularly the conclusion, this is the level 2 NCEA experiment standard, particularly looking at paired experiments. The conclusion is the last part we write in our assessment to basically summarise what we have found. So there's lots of things you can write in it. The first thing you should do is always address your question and make sure that when you are answering a question that you do it in context. Then we address causality, which is whether or not the intervention has caused it. Then we could talk about what has affected your data, made your data not as valid, maybe what could you have done differently, so what improvements could you make? What limitations are there on your findings? Who can you actually say this could probably apply to? And what further investigations could you do? Remembering that you don't have to do those. So when answering your question, it's really important that you restate your question. This means that everybody knows what you're talking about and that you make sure that you're talking in context. So I wonder if students in MCL's class ability to remember objects is affected by the time since viewing them. From my data, I feel I have enough evidence to suggest that the time since viewing the data does affect your memory. The second part is I'm going to talk about causality, and so do I think it's my intervention that caused the differences in my experiment? So that's the causality statement. And to do that, we need to have a well-designed experiment and 75% of our differences on one side of 0 if our sample is 20 or above. It should be stronger if our sample is smaller, but because we are doing this experiment in class, we'll go with the 75% rule. This can be shown on our box and whisker by the upper quartile sitting on or above 0, below 0, the upper quartile sitting on or below 0, or the lower quartile sitting on or above 0. As 0 doesn't prove or disprove, we can leave these out. So as you can see in the box and whisker, the upper quartile sits on 0, so 75% is below 0. So you can see here is 0, all right, and that's the upper quartile, and we've got 75% of our data sitting below the 0 number, so with negative numbers. So in our experiment, we can see the box and whisker has 75% of our data sitting below 0 as the upper quartile sits on 0. This means that we can suggest that the intervention of time has an effect on memory, specifically that people recall less of what they have been asked to remember after a period of time. The third thing we could look at is what has affected your data, what made your data perhaps not as valid. This is where we can talk about any of our experiment technique that we could improve, or that we might have caused our experiment to have other factors affecting the outcome. So what could have affected it? Is there another factor in play? Did your experiment go the way you expected? For example, I'm wondering if my participants tried their best. Was the difference related to time since viewing or was the distraction of a video in play? Was all the data collected accurately? Was there any way my participants could have altered their outcomes? These are all things that could have affected my data. What could you have done differently? So this is where we can talk about the changes you would make if you were to do the experiment again. So to try and account for the things that could have affected our data, we could write things here. E.g., I could offer an incentive to get my participants to try their best. I could ask them to sit in silence for 10 minutes to be sure it is the time, not the distraction of the video, that made a difference. I could make sure that my participants' data was correctly recorded and not altered by being perhaps more vigilant, watching more carefully what they were doing. The fifth thing, what limitations are there on your findings? So my experiment was done with students in a Year 12 maths class. This could limit expecting another group of people to have the same results, as they may not have the experience in trying to remember large amounts of information. I discovered from the internet, so I did a little bit of a Google search and found out that our ability to remember new information peaks in our 20s and then starts to decline in our 50s or 60s. So I'm pretty sure that what my data is telling me may not be true if I was trying to say it for all people or for people that were in their 50s or 60s. So I'm going to write up something along those lines. And I'm going to put in my little internet search because that shows that I've done a bit of thinking outside the box. What further investigation could you do? And remember, you don't have to do this. You're just going to say that these are things you could further investigate to be more sure about your particular claim. So if I wanted to claim this for all secondary school students, I could involve more age groups and more students to be sure. I could repeat the experiment with different types of intervention to see if time was the cause. So this is your opportunity just to give a few ideas on what could happen here. Thanks for listening.